Welcome to BeEnriched, a learn-at-home project produced by the Wellness Institute of Greater Buffalo in cooperation with the Buffalo Public Schools and hosted by Buffalo Public School teachers. Your host for today's virtual field trip is Michele Agosto, Director of Arts for the Buffalo School System. Now please join Michele as she travels to fun and educational destinations throughout Western New York.
Hello BPS family, welcome to BeEnriched, a televised field trip program just for you. And I'm Michele Agosto and I'm the Director of Arts for the Buffalo Public Schools. And I'm here today with a good friend of the Michigan Corridor and the Vice President and Curator of the Colored Musicians Club right here in Buffalo, Danny Williams. And thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thank you. So Danny, this is, we're sitting today in what is called the Historic Colored Musicians Club. And it's a beautiful space, very interactive, and so much learning is going on. But I wanted to address from the get the name of the space we're sitting in. It is called the Colored Musicians Club, and it uses a term that we really don't use that much anymore. Can you explain why that term is still in the name of the club?
At the turn of the century, right around 1901, if you wanted a job as a musician in the city of Buffalo, you had to be a member of the union, Local 53. But Local 53 did not allow people of color or women. So for over 17 years, they petitioned the national, oh, there it is, the AF of M, the American Federation of Musicians. And on February the 3rd, 1917, they gave us a charter. We were one of 38 charters they issued across the nation, and they issued them as not unions, but colored unions. In our charter, which is on the other side of the wall, it says Colored Musicians Union. New York State further enforced that when we got a charter as an organization, we were incorporated as the Colored Musicians Club. So we decided just to keep it.
So I know that the club opened in 1917.
The union.
The union.
The union came first, and the union formed the club.
Okay, and so then when did that actually occur? When did the union become the club?
Well, the union is the father of the organization,
okay,
and the club is an offspring.
Okay.
And the reason that happened was, even if you were a member of the union and you were working, when you finished work, you could not come off the stage and then go into the clubs and restaurants and eat, because colored folk were not allowed. You'd have to eat your food in the kitchen and then exit via the back door. So we bought this building in 1935, and upstairs we actually had a kitchen. So you could come upstairs and the stage is there, and we could play, you could shoot pool, listen to music, play, and eat. And so that's how all of that got started. So that was actually formed. We were chartered on July the 25th, 1935.
So I can imagine people being here all day, all night, just
yes,
playing and learning from each other and eating and enjoying each other's company. And I know that it grew into what became, I want to say, almost like the jazz mecca of definitely of Buffalo.
United States.
Of the United States.
Yes.
So tell me more about that, because there have been a lot of famous people that have come through these doors.
In those days, you got to realize there was no airplane traffic, and there wasn't a lot of automobile traffic. So if you wanted to get from one end of the country to the other, you went by train. The third largest train station on the planet was where? Right down there on Paderewski in Buffalo.
Right.
Grand Central Station, right here in Buffalo. So all the artists, if you were coming from New York to LA or LA to New York, you had to go through Chicago and Buffalo. So the club here was a way station. And we had places like Johnny's Steakhouse, and we had, which catered to people of color. And we also had the club itself. And you'd come to the club, and if you needed musicians to play, we had them. And we had people who traveled the country and traveled the world.
That's amazing. I know that two of my favorite vocalists and musicians have come through the store. I believe Billie Holiday has come through
Yes,
here,
ma'am.
and Charlie Parker.
Yes, ma'am.
And so talk about, I know that they're, I think, pretty significant musicians that have come through these doors. But I know you also have a picture of Dizzy Gillespie and
Yes.
Miles Davis.
Yes.
You know, I think it's so important to understand that these were American musicians that impacted history in so many ways, and they played here, right in the center of Buffalo.
You were talking about females.
Yes.
There's Dodo Green. Dodo Green was the first woman on the planet to sign a jazz record with Atlantic Records.
Oh, wow. That's big.
First one.
That's big.
Woman, period. And Dodo Green was a monster, and she toured the world. You mentioned Dizzy Gillespie. Dizzy Gillespie stopped here often, and he pulled a local artist by the name of Elvin Shepard. And Elvin Shepard, of course, later went on to teach Grover Washington. But Elvin toured with him for 8 years.
All right.
And his kids still live here in Buffalo.
Oh, is that right?
That's correct.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So I want to kind of stretch the conversation a little bit beyond this amazing club, this historic building, because it is actually a National Historic Landmark, isn't it?
It's a local preservation site, it is a state preservation site, and a federal preservation site.
So this ain't going nowhere.
So all the 3 plaques are across the front of the building.
Oh, is that right? That's
Yes, ma'am.
amazing. That's great. So other than the plaques, if you come around this neighborhood, which is we're on Michigan and Broadway,
Yes, ma'am.
you go down Michigan Street and you see these amazing archways. They're sparkling brand new. And it welcomes you right into the Michigan African American corridor. Can you talk about the arches a bit and why that's so significant, this entryway into this neighborhood?
I think that was all a part of our local political leaders who wanted to outline an area. For instance, if you go through South Buffalo, you will notice that all of the major streets are also not only written in English, but there's a Gaelic sign. So your Gaelic language is displayed. So as a child, you grow up knowing your language, the language of your forefathers. So there are areas, and there are certain neighborhoods we know, this is a certain neighborhood, this is a certain neighborhood. Well, there was no designation of a heritage corridor, which is what we call it. So the archways simply outline an area that's going to be the African American Heritage Corridor.
So talk more about why those arches were placed here, because right next door you have really important structures. You have the Nash House, which is now called the Nash House Museum. You have WFO, which is right next door. Now they have a museum. And you also have the church over here, which is called the
Michigan Street.
Michigan Street Baptist Church.
Yes.
Thank you. And all of them are really significant, and the church especially, because there is this component of the Underground Railroad that is talked about. So can you share a little bit about that connection in history?
If you look outside, and another reason this corridor was chosen, if you go outside and you look at the sidewalk, you'll find period sidewalks. In other words, the cement is mixed with pebbles and stones, as it would have been 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And they're feet in brass, and the toes are pointing north. So if you didn't know where you were going, you simply follow the sidewalk and the feet, they will lead you north.
That's amazing.
And will lead you right down to the Niagara River.
Wow, that's incredible.
And you'll also notice that the light fixtures are different on here. They're a period lighting, but they're electric, but they look as though they were there in the 18th and 19th century.
Okay, so was Reverend Nash instrumental in this kind of?
He was the pastor of the church.
So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think that Reverend Nash was he was the Martin Luther King of his day. And because of the work that went on at the Nash House and the meetings that were held at the church, he lived in the Nash House, he and his wife. And his family, his brother, his children, they were all, we would call them activists today. But because of the work they started there was another organization that grew out of their work called the NAACP, which actually met on the other side of the river.
Okay.
Even though it was an American prodigy.
Right, right.
And Reverend Nash was a foundation for that work.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know there's a bunch of Nash papers and things like that our young people can actually look through. I think they're archived at the library. So I want, if you don't mind sharing maybe one last thing for our young people who are watching, something that you really want them to know about why this area is so important, this African American corridor is so important.
First of all, when at the turn of the century again, right after this thing called Reconstruction that really didn't reconstruct, all of these folks started coming north. You had carpenters, you had electricians, you had all these people who worked. Well, the musicians came too because the money was here. The industry based north was where the jobs were. So of course, when they came north, they brought their families. And when they got here, there were all these different rules. You can't play because you're not a member of the union. You can't live in certain neighborhoods. The banks were not loaning you money, so they had to set up their own structure. So what these musicians did was they got together, they formed their own union. They started a credit union. Now you could buy a car because they would loan you the money to buy a car, and you paid the union back the money instead of a bank. And the same thing with homes. If you wanted to buy a home, you could get a loan. And the other thing that was really, really important was they did things that allowed you to see that you had value, you had worth, and the things that you like to do, it's okay. On Sundays and during the summertime, every first Sunday they had a parade that started in front of the building, went down Broadway to Jefferson to Sycamore and back up to Michigan. And we've got pictures of those parades, and the folks used to just line the streets by the hundreds and thousands. And this was a reoccurring affair. So they not only gave people here hope, and they gave them the ability to join the American way of life, they also gave them a sense of pride, which was important.
Yes, it's definitely important, still important.
Still is.
Yes, so thank you, Danny, so much for sharing all of this information with us, and I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of the Community Action Organization of Western New York, the CAO. For more information on the CAO's five-pronged approach to fight poverty in the Buffalo area, log on to caowny.org.
And now we have here today with us Maria Ta, and she is the program director for Ujima Company. Thank you, Maria, for joining us today.
Thank you, Michelle.
I'm so happy you're here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So I wanted to have you a part of this because I think what you do at Ujima is really, really important. And we're at the club where this is another cultural mecca. And so is Ujima Company. And I know it was founded in 1978 by Lorna C. Hill, who has recently passed.
Yes.
And she has, she used Ujima. I want to read what it means in Swahili. It means collective work and responsibility.
Exactly.
And so I wanted to ask you, why do you think she chose that name for Ujima?
From the stories that I've been told, I had many a porch visit over the last few months talking to all of the alumni, the founding members who came through and really started Ujima back in 1978. And for her, it just made sense. Community is what was always the solution for her. It was where the heart of the people was and continues to be. So for her, building a collective artistry, a theater around the idea of a community learning and growing and teaching others just made sense. And it still continues to make sense as we're looking into this next phase of what the company will be.
So you mentioned the word teaching. And I know at the heart of Ujima, there's a lot of education, a lot of teaching going on, even though it's a professional theater. So can you tell me why you feel that the education component of theater is so important to the soul and heart of Ujima?
Yeah, it comes from the idea that understanding throughout the collective is the foundation or the bedrock of growth. So for us, we always welcome an environment where people of all ages are involved. So company members would bring their kids along. We have grandma over, we have mothers, fathers, aunts, and uncles. And that multi-generational atmosphere was just conducive to learning. We learned naturally, as all communities learn. People learn from younger folks learn from older folks. So whenever we're doing programs or doing productions, that learning process is integral from the very youngest person that's involved, even if it's a little baby that's just joining us because mom can't find a babysitter for rehearsal. Lorna always yelled at actors, if they're not showing up to rehearsal because they can't find a babysitter, that is not an excuse.
That's right.
You bring your kid along. Maria's going to sit there as a stage manager, teach the kids how to draw on the side while mom's doing her work on stage. But that's the environment that we've learned is most helpful to people as just human beings and as artists. It allows them the opportunity to grow so much deeper.
It's almost like that proverb, right? It takes a village, and that's what I think it really is about.
Exactly.
Because it does.
Yeah.
So Ujima is now located, and again, the educational tie is really interesting to me because it's located now at a school. It used to be on Elmwood and kind of popped around, and now it's at a permanent location at School 77, which is on the west side of Buffalo. And it actually serves as a professional theater space and an educational space and a community space. And so I wanted to kind of talk about all those kinds of platforms that Ujima uses, and I also want to talk more about the specific projects that are done at Ujima. So can you tell us, now that it's at School 77, what has changed, if anything, about Ujima?
Not really much has changed. I've been tasked with looking at the community we are in now, because now we're in a neighborhood. We're no longer part of a business district. We're right next to other people who have lived and grown within that neighborhood. So my job was to go out and look at what that community makeup looks like. We know that the west side of Buffalo is largely immigrant refugee based. So we're starting to look at how do we involve that community. So while we are primarily an African American theater organization, we are always multi-ethnic and always multi-generational. So how do we bring in their stories and allow them to use theater in order to tell those stories? We're thinking of ways to do story circles, things like that. Our youth programs, our Dunbar programs, we're really trying to push for theater artists and artists in general, dance, song, that are from different cultures. So we're looking at the Burmese community. What kind of dances can they teach our children? We're looking at our African communities, our Puerto Rican communities, our Hispanic communities. What kind of teachers do they have within the community themselves? They're not necessarily teaching artists by trade, but they know their art truly, deeply, and they're willing to teach younger folks that.
What's the value in that? What's the value in learning from people that maybe don't look like you?
I think a lot of it is understanding the humanity aspect of other people, especially for young people, having that shield be taken off in terms of different people mean different things. I know for me, I grew up on the west side before it was cool. So I grew up in the same kind of neighborhood where it really didn't make a difference for me where my friends were from. They were just my friends. And starting that off at such a young age helps them to become better people, better citizens, better community members, because there's this deep shared understanding of who someone is and how their culture impacts them.
So you mentioned the Dunbar Project, and that may be of interest to some of our viewers who may be aspiring, thespians.
Exactly.
And I know it focuses on a particular group of age group, 12 to 18. So I'm wondering if you can speak to those young people who may be interested in acting or directing or staging, what you actually can offer them. Yeah,
so our Dunbar Project, we just started it back up earlier this spring before COVID hit, but we've now transferred it over onto a digital platform to make it easier for students and families to stay engaged. We're working on doing our fall and our winter semesters starting up soon, so check out our website for any of that information there. But the program typically runs for about 2 to 3 months for each class or cohort. It's for ages 12 to 18, but we're kind of open and flexible. So if you have someone younger, someone older, we want to try to fold them in as best as possible, maybe through apprenticeships or starting off with a shadowing or something like that. But it goes through all the different core elements of theater. So Lorna always wanted people to know that theater isn't just acting. So theater includes dance and music, and for us we've added technical elements as well. So if you're interested in lighting, production, stage management, sound, costumes, theater is all of those things. So we teach each of those elements for all of the students so that they can be well-rounded artists.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Yeah.
So if you're interested, make sure you go and look at their website. And thank you, Maria, so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of Harmac Medical Products, an award-winning international contract manufacturer of single-use medical devices, located on Bailey Avenue on Buffalo's east side. For more information, log on to harmac.com. Funding for BeEnriched is provided through the generosity of KeyBank in partnership with the First Niagara Foundation. KeyBank, planning a better tomorrow for our clients, communities, and teammates. KeyBank opens doors. For info, log on to keybank.com.
And so now we're here with Tina Washington, and she's the Executive Director for the African American Cultural Center. And thank you so much, Tina, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.
I'm so happy you're here. So I want to talk a bit about the African American Cultural Center, and I may just refer to it as the center if that's okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
I know that it was founded in 1958 by a gentleman named Malcolm Ernai.
That is correct.
And he created it with the sole purpose of nurturing and promoting the African cultural arts
That is
and African
correct.
American cultural arts. And so in that center, there are 3 houses, right?
Yes.
There's the Paul Robeson Theater,
Yes,
there's the Kakilambe African Dance and Drum Troupe,
correct.
and the African World Studies Archives.
Yes.
That's a lot in that space.
Yes.
So can you tell me why those 3 elements that make up the African American Cultural Center are so important to our young people and to the community in Buffalo?
Yes. Malcolm Ernai was actually of Caribbean descent, and he recognized the need to study culture and heritage, because if you know who you are, then you can have pride in who you are and also have an appreciation for other cultures and ethnicities. And so at the African American Cultural Center, we actually also observe different customs and traditions, and it's a very fascinating place to be, because there is always a lot going on, but it's always in a cultural context.
So I've been there before, and and it's almost like you go in and you don't expect what you expect. The theater is beautiful,
Yes.
and it houses about 50 people, more
No,
than that.
actually it's a 100-seat theater.
But it feels so
Yeah.
intimate.
It is, and that's the beauty of it, that intimate setting.
So how does that translate to our young people? So I know that there are a lot of young people interested in dance, interested in theater, and I know that they're looking for a place to practice that. Do you offer opportunities for young people to do these kinds of things?
Oh, absolutely. We have theater workshops. We also have our August Wilson monologues,
Yes.
which is really an opportunity for young people to really learn performance art and the art of oratory, speaking, just being able to engage on a particular topic. And so it's so beneficial because it's almost like an introduction to the theater arts. And we include a lot of that in our programming after school, as well as summer programming, over the breaks, the winter break, spring break. So we want to expose our young people to that form of art.
Okay, I want to jump into, you mentioned the August Wilson monologues, and I know in the Buffalo Public Schools that's a big deal, and we've had a couple of winners in the district. So can you talk a little bit more about that, and why, who August Wilson was, first of all, and why this kind of competition is really important to our young people?
I think, again, like Malcolm Ernai, August Wilson had a vision, and it was really to promote the theater arts, being able to promote oratory arts, and also, you know, being able to do that with youth. And I think it's so important because it gives youth an outlet. There are many different ways that our youth can spend productive time. But certainly one of the ways is within centers and community organizations. And so we want to make sure that we have that available to them, particularly when there are other things that might not be as impressive for them to get involved with. So we want them involved with positive things that contribute back to society and make a difference.
Absolutely, agree 100%. So I know that there are, I want to jump into the dance element because I think, you know, the African dance is awesome, and I think the power behind that and the history behind that is also really important to know.
Yes.
So can you talk about why you found it necessary to introduce and keep on inside your African American Culture Center African dance, and how can our young people get involved with that?
West African dance traditions are an important part of African culture, African American culture in particular, I should say, as well as maybe Caribbean culture and many other cultures, because we all kind of intersect and it's all interrelated, and that's the beauty of it. But West African dance is what we specialize in, and it gives the young people an opportunity to be able to learn how to move and how to be able to express themselves in a way where they're doing something that connects them with the history, with the ancient traditions, with culture. At the same time, it gives them an outlet in terms of them being able to showcase their abilities and what they're able to do, but also grow. So that's very important for us, and that's why we decided to keep that on as a program.
Yeah, I think it's important too. It's really a language.
It is.
Yeah.
And also, it has a lot to do with making transitions in life in terms of passages, growing up, self-development, rituals that have to do with moving from young adult into adulthood.
Yes. And so talking about moving it's to the future and also connecting it to the past, I want to talk about the archives real quick.
Okay.
So what would you find in the archives?
In our archives, we have all kinds of ancient art. We have manuscripts. We have different books, historical books. We are really focusing on developing and building that because we are going to actually have a museum on site in the future.
Oh, that's
So,
exciting.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes.
And so young people could go do research if they wanted to there.
Absolutely. And also research genealogy. So we'll have that available as well.
Oh, that's huge.
Yes.
Tina, thank you so much for joining us today. Everything that you offer there is just so important, and it seems fitting that we're doing it right here at the club because we are all interconnected, right?
Certainly.
Yeah, and especially through the arts. So thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle.
And thank you all for watching BeEnriched. We'll see you next time.